Welcome, third graders, to the Cathance River Nature Preserve. My name is Carey.
And I'm Sarah.
And we are lucky enough to work for an organization called CREA. And at CREA, we get to have field trips come here, and we have a summer camp, and we have public programs, all people who come and enjoy this preserve and learn about the animals who live here and the plants that you can find here.
And we want you to remember that this place is 230 acres big. This is a big nature preserve. There are miles of hiking trails, there's 2 ponds, there's just beautiful stuff to see, and you can come here anytime you want. It's open to the public. So the Brunswick-Topsham Land Trust has this as one of its nature preserves. Open to the public, free. You can come here any day of the year. So we're gonna head down now. Let's go explore.
Before we can explore a pond, we have to figure out what makes a pond a pond. Scientists actually disagree on this. They have lots of different theories, but there are 2 things that all scientists agree ponds need to have to be a pond. To make them not a lake, not a river, just a pond. So in order to be a pond, you have to be shallow, and shallow enough so that the sunlight will reach all the way down to the bottom. That's important because then plants can grow all the way across the bottom of that shallow pond. The other thing that's important is that a pond has to be still. If you think in your head of a river that's constantly moving or a stream, a pond isn't going to do that. The water in the pond is still. So the 2 things to remember about all ponds, even though they can look very, very different, is that they're all still and that all of them are shallow enough for the sunlight to reach the very bottom of the pond. So now that we know what makes a pond, we're gonna go check out 2 different ponds here at CREA and see what makes them different.
So in order to go explore these ponds, we can't just walk in our sneakers. That would be a total disaster. So we've got these awesome looking things called waders. And they've got these rubber boots and waterproof pants that are attached to the boots. And they're called waders because it lets you wade right into the pond, and you can wade around in the pond without getting soaked. So they are a little tricky to get into, but it always works out. They do keep you nice and dry. So we're gonna put these on in order to get into our pond.
So in order to check out a pond, you kind of have to get in it. You have to get up close and see what's growing there. And it's not just about the water. Ponds aren't just a little pool of water. That's a puddle. What makes ponds more exciting is all the plants that grow in them and near them, around the edges, the animals that come to the pond. Birds come here to eat bugs. The bugs hatch out of the muck in the bottom of the pond. So what we're gonna do today is we're going to go in the pond and investigate all those things. The plants that live here, the animals, the muck at the bottom, and see how we can get to know this pond. Then we're gonna go to another pond on a different trail and compare what's the same, what's different about both of them. So I'm gonna get into the water and we'll take a good close-up look at some of the stuff that's living here. All right, so let's check out some of these plants. Whoa, there went a frog. So, growing here, I can see we have, do you see these 2 different kinds of plants? These are all the same, all about the same height, and they're really flat blades of grass, leaves I should say. And over here, this kind of clump, it's all growing together out of one clump. And I should show you a close-up here. So this is a rush, and there's a little phrase you can remember about the different kinds of plants that grow in ponds, because they all look kind of the same, right? They're like tall green leaves, but once you look closer and learn this little riddle, they're different. The riddle to help you remember is, sedges have edges and rushes are round. So we know this is a rush because it's round. When you do this, you can feel it's totally round and rolls like a little mini straw in your hand. Meanwhile, this leaf, these cattail leaves, don't roll. They're very, very different, so not round. Now, cattails, you might know, grow to be very tall, probably as tall as me. And they get in summer on the top a little brown, it's actually technically their flower, and then it explodes with seeds, white puffy, millions of little white puffy seeds, and you can shake them and blow them in the wind. So these plants will grow very tall. So already we have two different kinds of plants. Cattails are overtaking this zone. Rushes are growing in nice little clumps. I see a clump here, see a clump over there. So they grow in really different ways too. So that's a good thing to notice when you're looking around your pond for the different types of plants.
So we are going to try to keep track of these different plants that we see and make a map. And here's our map. And we're going to try to record the different plants that we're seeing and where they grow. Make a map of our pond. So looking at our key here of all the living things, these are all the different kinds of plants that we have. Let's make some symbols to represent the plants we're seeing. So starting right now with cattails, again, your symbol does not have to be just like mine. Do whatever helps you remember the plant. I'm gonna make cattails be really tall with that fluffy brown flower on top. And that turns into the fluffy seeds. Maybe I'll even add some fluffy seeds. And for the rushes, the round rushes, they grow in clumps. So I'm gonna draw the rush in a clump. You can pick your own symbol that reminds you what the plants are. And then we're gonna take these symbols and we're gonna draw them onto our map where we just saw those plants. So we were right next to the dock, just on the other side of the dock. So I saw a couple clumps of rushes. I think I saw 2 clumps right there. And then the cattails were all sprinkled throughout, a little bit deeper.
So another plant you can see from where we are right now, in addition to the cattails and the rushes, look on land here. These are all ferns, and ferns grow where it's really wet. They love this wet spot. Notice though, are they growing in the actual water? Let's go check this out. Are they growing in the water? No, they're actually growing on the land. So right on the edge, it's definitely wet and mucky. You wouldn't want to walk here in sneakers, but they're on sort of that right up against the edge of the pond. So if we investigate on the other side of our dock, let's see if it's similar over here. So yes, check this out. What do you notice here? These are those green cattails that are going to get super tall, taking over this area. And then we've got, as soon as the land starts, that mushy, wouldn't want to walk in sneakers kind of land, we've got the ferns. So it's almost like ponds have little zones where different things can grow. So right on the edge, we've got ferns, in this pond at least. Then when it gets watery, we've got our cattails. And then a little bit deeper, let's see what's out here. All right. So we have some pond weeds that are growing in the water. Instead of growing around the edges, they're actually growing in the water, 100% in the water. So looking more closely at this kind of feathery looking plant is crazy. It's a carnivorous plant. It eats bugs. This is called bladderwort, and it's called that because do you see all these tiny little, they look like air bubbles or little seeds or something? They're actually little bladders that help the plant eat bugs. Not many plants can do that. And I want to see if we get some underwater footage, if we can see that plant up close a little bit better. Let's give that a try. All right, we can see those little plants. Okay, so let's add some of these new plants and new things we've been seeing into our drawing. So for ferns, those have a nice tall stem and their leaves are wide at the base and then they get more narrow as they go to the top. If that's too complicated, you could also use F for your symbol for ferns. You could get creative. Just something for you that represents ferns. Underwater plants, we saw that one called bladderwort. And if you remember, that was kind of squiggly like a vine. And then it had kind of feathery. So little featheries sticking off here. So remember, there were also little bladders that help it digest the bugs. So you could add some of those. And again, if that's getting too complicated, you could do a B for bladderwort. Some symbol that's going to help you remember the underwater plants. And then thinking about where those were, remember we were really noticing some zones in our drawing. We noticed that right along the edge is where those ferns were. So I'm going to do some of my ferns here. Right along the edge, remember they weren't quite in the water. Right along the edge. And then what came a little bit, once we stepped into the water, we saw those cattails taking over that whole area. They don't have their brown hot dog flowers yet, but they will later this summer. And then deeper in the water is where we saw that bladderwort with its little tiny bladders that eat the bugs. So we can add that. So already we're seeing these zones where ferns grow along the edge of the pond, then the cattails and some of the rushes, and then once it's deep in the water, the bladderwort. So also around the edge of the pond, something that there's a lot of, check this out. This kind of really soft, squishy layer right along the edge of the pond. This time there's not ferns, but there's squishy moss. Listen to the sound my foot makes when I squish on this. There's water oozing up. So this moss, you would not want to walk here in sneakers.
And I'm going to freeze this for just a minute. Did anybody notice the new sound that's in the background? There's a new noise, an animal that just started making quite a bit of noise. I'm going to see if I can replay that sound again and see if you can figure out what it is. Somebody had told us that they thought there was a pair of birds nesting in this part of the pond. And it seems like we might have just found the nest.
Do you see this tree? This tree behind me with that hole in the top? That's called a tree cavity. Just like you get a cavity in your tooth, this is a cavity in the tree. And it's all hollowed out on the inside. And the bird can actually make a nest inside there.
And then after we listened to the birds for a while, we turned around and we found 3 turtles basking on this log in the sun. Can you see them? Animals definitely seem to be loving this pond so far. All right, so let's add the other things we've seen recently. For moss, that moss, really up close, if you look at it, kind of looks like a star, doesn't it? So I'm going to use a star for my symbol for moss. Again, you could use an M for moss or whatever symbol works for you. And then going up to our map, this whole little edge here where I was standing was very mossy. And just because I was so excited to see it, I'm going to draw that turtle log where we saw those 3 turtles. And right next to the moss, remember, was that dead tree with the little hole in it, the cavity, where those tree swallows came out and sat on top.
But also important for the pond habitat is what grows around the edge. So let's take a look. I see a mix here of trees and shrubs. And I also see some evergreen trees, those green needly ones that stay green all winter. And then some leafy trees with leaves on them. So there's a really big mix of different tree types here. And why that might matter, what do you think? Think about what's going to happen to those leaves when they fall off the trees. Where are they going to end up? Maybe some will go into the bottom of the pond and create a certain type of muck on the bottom of the pond. If it was just evergreen trees, the bottom of the pond would probably look a lot different. So in a minute, I'm going to take a scoop and we'll see what it's like at the bottom of this pond. But for now, take a look around.
And see if you notice more evergreens or more leafy trees growing around the edge of this pond. Or maybe it's really a mix of both. As you're looking, make some marks on your map that show the different kinds of trees that grow around this pond. And you might be able to notice some other plants growing along the edge too, like those bright green cattails. I'm going to add those to my drawings also. And remember, you can use whatever symbols work best for you. I noticed a real mix. Some big evergreens on this side. And it looked like a lot of leafies in front of them. I also noticed a big splotch of those bright green cattails in the water all along this edge. And I saw it down on this side, kind of up and down the whole edge of the pond. This is a picture that was taken from a drone way up high above our pond. And you can see the dock in the picture way over there on the left. So this picture was taken in early spring, so you can't see the cattails yet because they haven't started growing. But otherwise, I know we'd see them all around the edge there. And you can't see the leaves on the trees. But what you can tell is there's quite a few evergreen trees scattered all around this pond and forest. So we're going to take a quick walk around the pond and just see if there's anything else we want to add to our map.
I can tell you from squishing around that this whole edge is very, very mossy. There's some spongy moss. And then this whole area of water here is full of cattails. I think that's going to be all that's here this summer. Hundreds and hundreds of cattails. All right, so we're we're gonna investigate our last edge of the pond, the other long edge that we haven't seen yet. I see a couple little clumps of rushes, but barely any. But mostly this is like cattail alley here, tons of cattails. All right, so we've investigated this pond really well. We've looked at all the plants. We've looked at the plants that grow in the water, around the edge, all the trees. Now it's time to investigate some of the non-living parts of the pond that are really important too. So the water, the air, the soil, the pond muck. So far, the deepest I've gone up to is really my knees. So let's go out in the middle a little bit more and see how deep it gets. So I feel like this is actually the deepest spot. So let's put our stick in. All right, so not too deep. The sun can definitely hit the bottom. In fact, when I'm here, I can see everything on the bottom. It's mostly a lot of dead sticks and a lot of dead cattail leaves. All right, so let's see how deep that was. The mark we made is right here. So that looks like, we'll use our measuring tape, exactly 28 inches deep. And in terms of how that was on me, 28 inches deep right here. Pretty deep. I wouldn't have wanted to go too much deeper. Let's take a look now at another part of the pond that's not living, and that is the muck at the bottom. Let's take a scoop and check out what it looks like. All right, so let's scoop for some muck at the bottom of this pond. First of all, imagine, what do you think it's gonna look like? You've seen a pond before. When I scoop this strainer down, what do you think is gonna be in here? Leaves? Sticks? Maybe some old mushy cattail leaves? Will it just be plain old mud? Rocks? Let's find out. Roll up my sleeve. Oh, and while we're investigating this, another thing we want to know about the water is the temperature. And I have my handy dandy thermometer here. So we're just going to stick this in because it takes a few minutes to register. It's a special thermometer that can go underwater. Don't do that with your normal thermometer. And we'll check on that in a minute. Now for now, the muck. Let's get some muck. Ah, yes, some muck. All right, let's get some more muck. Oh, yeah. All right, so I'm gonna come give you an up-close look, but this muck definitely is kind of gross. So when we look at this muck, you see it here? Scooped up some bladderwort. Oops, you're not muck. Put that back. This muck has dead leaves, lots of dead leaves. Some of them are more mushed up than others. Some of them are still completely whole. Maybe these are from last year. So a lot of leaves. That's really all I see. Oh, here's some, I can tell that's a cattail leaf. So it's a lot of leaves that basically are breaking down and turning into mucky muck at the bottom. I see some sticks, quite a few sticks. Some pine needles. A lot of leaves and leaf stems. So yeah, this is really kind of like mushy, muddy mud. So, it's been in here a few minutes looking at this water thermometer. It's almost 70. It's 68 degrees. Having been standing in here, I wouldn't say it feels like a warm bathtub or anything, but 68 degrees, that's pretty warm. Okay, so the last thing, very last thing of all that we want to check out about this pond is the air. Now that might sound silly, but we've investigated the other non-living parts of this pond. So the water, and the soil, that pond soil muck, and now the air all around us at the pond. Why does that matter? Think about when you look out at this pond, is it sunny or shady generally? Would you say that most of this pond water is getting sun or shade? So there are no big trees making shade for us in the middle of the pond. This is a very, very sunny pond. And I think that's probably why our water temperature was pretty warm. What did we say that water temperature was? 68? That's warm water. So I think that sun is shining down and heating up this whole pond. It's a very sunny pond, and we take the air temperature, I have right here 74 degrees. So 74 degrees and very sunny. Are all ponds going to be full sun? We'll find out.
So here we are at pond number 2. You can already tell it looks really different from our first pond, but it's still a pond because you can tell the water isn't moving and it's shallow. Sunlight could reach the bottom all the way across this pond. So in this pond, because as I look around, there's not that much living things to examine, we're going to start by talking about the non-living things. And if you remember from our last pond, that means the air, the water, and the soil or rock around the pond and in the pond. So the first thing you notice about this pond is what the edge of the pond looks like. If you remember in our last pond, it was kind of a slow slope and there's lots of plants and moss around the edges. This pond goes straight down and it's really hard rock. I'm not going to be bouncing on any hummocks or moss around the edges of this pond. So that edge will probably affect what's underneath my feet right now. I can tell you it's very soft and squishy. And if you look up, you can see that there's pine tree, there's evergreens here, and there's some leafy trees. So what do you think the muck under this pond is going to look like? Will there be lots of leaves? Will there be lots of sand? Will it look like the last pond? Let's take a scoop. So I see a whole lot of leaves, and they're not breaking down very fast. They look like really solid leaves still. And there's quite a bit of them. So it looks like there's not that goo that there was on the other pond. Most of the bottom of this pond is just going to be those leaves that fell off of the trees over this pond. So as I'm scooping, I keep trying to find that muck. And I keep coming up with leaves. I can tell you this pond feels colder too. And I'm deeper and deeper. Still leaves. Oh, and some sticks. So this bottom is obviously a lot different from the other pond. We never got to muck. And if you can see, if I reach my hand down, I only get to there before I touch leaves. But look how far my body sinks in before I'm on something solid. So there is a bunch of leaf matter in this pond. Where did all those leaves come from? Why weren't there this many leaves in the last pond? And if you look up above, this pond actually has trees that branch out over the entire pond. The first pond we were at was really open and airy. You could look up and see the sky. When I look up here, I just see evergreens and leaves all the way up to the top. And all of that leaf matter above us is going to make it shadier in this pond. And if you remember on the last pond, it was really warm because it was really sunny. So this pond, I'm guessing, is going to be colder. Let's see. Whoa, the air temperature here is only 64 degrees. At the last pond, it was 74, so it's almost 10 degrees cooler here because of all this shade. The other non-living part we have to check out now is our water temperature. Do you think that's going to be warmer or colder than the last spot? So the water temperature here is only 60 degrees, which is cooler than our last year. Oh, and it's dropping down to 58 degrees here. So it's definitely a cooler pond. And that's going to make the animals who live here maybe a little bit different. All right, so now we have to figure out how deep this pond is. And I'm going to measure it with this stick and see how far out I can get. It's already deeper than the last one. Whoa, look at how far down that stick goes.
And I didn't get it on film, but Carrie almost fell in the pond.
All right, so I can tell you that pond is definitely deeper than the last pond. I almost went over my waders. The spot that I could reach with the stick, when I put it in, it went all the way up to here, which is all the way up to here on me. And let's measure it with our measuring tape. 50 inches deep. That is deep. And I wonder if I could get out further. It might even be deeper the further out you go. And most of that is just a big layer of leaves. All right, now it's time to look at the living things. I don't think this will take much time. I'm looking around and I don't see any cattails. I don't see any bladderwort or any other underwater plants. The only moss that's here, it's a little bit right here, but that's on a rock. It doesn't have to do with the water at all. There's no ferns. There's no rushes, no little hummocks of things to grow. There are some evergreen trees, that one big one right here. And there's some leafy trees along the edges. And on our little end of our pond here, you can see some more evergreen trees. But that's really it for plants around here. So now, let's add all those trees that we just saw to our key. I'm going to add some evergreen trees and some leafy trees down in this corner where we started our video. All right, so now let's explore the rest of this pond. We're going to go counterclockwise around the pond. So make sure you have your map with you, and we'll head down to the far end. All right, so now you started at the far end. We're about halfway up the pond. And as I'm looking around, again, I see a little bit of moss here. But even this moss is on top of a rock. It's not soft and squishy. I see some leafy trees right up above me. This section is a lot more leafy trees than evergreens. There's only one evergreen tree in this section. And other than that, it's pretty much just the rocks. We're traveling this way around the pond, and there are a lot more leafy trees right here. And just one evergreen. While I have my map out here though, I'm gonna draw, I saw some big rocks over here. So I'm gonna draw my rocks, those cliffs all up in here. Maybe I'll even label it that it's a rock. So now I'm all the way at the other end of the pond. When I look straight ahead, I can see where we started and did all of our non-living measurements. So I'm all the way at the other end of the pond. And this end of the pond does seem to get a little bit more sunlight. And if I look up, I think it might be because there's no evergreens at this end. This end is all these leafy tree leaves that are gonna fall. So I bet later in the summer, this end would be shady as well. I'm on a little pile of moss here, but the moss is again growing on a rock, so it's not bouncy and squishy like in the other pond. And as I look around, I don't see any ferns. There's some shrubby bushes here. And if I look in the water, I can actually see some salamander eggs, which is exciting. But as for plant life, there's not that much here. All right, so now let's add the new stuff that we found on that last trip into the pond. This is the end we're at, right opposite from where we started. And right over here, I had some shrubs. I'm gonna look, where's my shrubs? Oh, there they are. So they're gonna be little sticks with tangles between them so the birds can hide in them. And then this end was all leafy trees. They didn't have any evergreens. Then out here, just because it was a special find, I'm gonna draw our little blob of salamander eggs on that stick. So we remember that we found those down there. And this was some more rock right here. There's our pond. Now we're going to use an underwater camera and see what we can see. I'm going to see if I can get an up close look at some salamander eggs I see in here. Oh, there they are. You can see the bottom of the pond has a lot of leaves on it. Not much else.
So there you go. We've mapped both our ponds now. And you can see that they are really different. They have different plants. They have different edges. One's more rocky. One has a million cattails. The bottom of the pond, muck, was really different in one pond, mucky, and the other pond, leafy. The temperature was different. The sunny versus shady was different. So they're really quite different, but we know that they're both ponds because the sunlight can reach the bottom. It's shallow enough that the sunlight can reach the bottom on both of them, and they're still. The water's not going anywhere. So what we're going to do in the next couple videos together is check out what lives in these ponds. We're going to scoop up some bugs, see what sort of pond life is happening in each of these ponds, and see, are there different things living in each different pond because they're so different? Or are they the same creatures living there? We'll find out next time.